Welcome to That Good Fight, a Reformation for Gentlemen. My name is Aaron Edwards. I'm joined by my usual partner in crime, Dr. Nathan Paler. How are you doing?
Hello. Yeah, I'm good. It's been a while.
It has been a while. Have you had a good summer?
We're not even together now.
That's
We're
true.
not even in the same room.
Yeah, it's true. It's been very hard to find moments of coalescing in the same room.
They will be
we've
more common in future.
That's right. We have some plans afoot, and hopefully, we have thank you to a good friend and a member of our Watch On Church, Chris Mountain, offering to help us with some sound editing. So that's very helpful.
Yeah, legend.
And good to listen. Thank you for those of you who've been listening into the podcast of late, and even persevering through the ever so slightly dodgy sound when Nathan and I have tried to retroactively edit things without the best equipment.
Sufferings produce character, and character produces hope.
That's true.
It's going to
I also love the fact
virtue.
I feel like our listeners are also being sanctified by the having to go through low quality. Yeah.
Yes.
Like you could listen to a podcast that has really high quality production at every level, but the Lord might want you to suffer through some, for your ears' sake. And you're going to get the same content as we provide really anywhere else. I hope not in this country for now, at least. So, but we are encouraged. It is encouraging. We're getting a lot of good feedback. A lot of people kind of listening in, and sending me messages about it, and encouraged to hear, and encouraging us to keep going and to keep the voice that we're providing especially for British Christians, but we have a lot of listeners beyond Britain as well on these themes. And one of those pertinent themes, which we did do an episode on a while back, of course, it comes up a lot. It's patriotism. It's national identity. Of course, we've talked about this in various ways in episodes throughout this year, and it's come to a bit of a usual summer frothing over of patriotic outpouring in relation to state overreach, which tends to happen, especially how it tends to happen in Britain. I feel like that's when I was on a podcast in America recently, and I was asked about the situation in Britain and whether it would lead to sort of civil war or anything like that, as the Americans seem to think that's inevitable. And I kind of think I don't really see that being inevitable, but I do see a lot of furor coming up among people, and people kind of waking up. Is that something you see, Nathan, as you look at the kind of flag movement over the summer, over the kind of sense of the police?
It's always the way, by the way, that these things do happen in summer. I mean, it happened last year after the forgive me, where did it begin last year? In which part of the country? I can't remember what it was called now. Southport. Thank you. Yes, I knew it began with an S. My brain's a bit like Swiss cheese at the moment. Anyway, yes, last year with the Southport riots, it happened. Obviously, a lot of the stuff happening during COVID, the George Floyd riots were happening in the summer. Historically, this is true as well. The Peasants' Revolt happened in June, July of 1381, and also the French Revolution. So these sorts of moments, it's when you've got more time, the days are longer. So yes, we are seeing more things, and I think this is going to happen. Will it end in civil war? I doubt that, although I do have respect for the thesis, and I can see that the main chap involved who is proposing this, who studies civil war for a living, has realized that there are hallmarks of this, and it's undoubtedly true that there are tensions in British society that are significant and are ongoing and are not going to be we're never going to be resolved in the summer of 2024, will not be resolved this summer of 2025. They will keep going because they are fissures that the establishment, successive governments have allowed to emerge over many years. Now, I have seen, to answer your question more directly, Aaron, my wife and I were traveling around this summer, going to my parents, going to London, going down to Gloucester, going all sorts of places, and everywhere. I mean, it should be said for American viewers, listeners, everywhere, on every bypass, at every junction, on every motorway, there are English flags, non-permitted. That is to say, no one's got a license to put these up. It's not the council putting them up. They are everywhere. Mostly English flags, though some Union flags, but they're everywhere. And roundabouts. Also, I was driving around here in Derbyshire and noticed that over a roundabout, like the famous one that started it. I can't remember where it was now. But the around here in Derbyshire, there was a white roundabout in the middle, and over the top of which they painted a St. George's cross, red St. George's cross. So it is, something is happening. And it brings me great joy. It brings me great joy, even though I've read and I've listened to several voices in recent weeks saying that protests achieve nothing. You can go and listen to the academic agent, his works on this and his perspective on this, though he seems to be in a minority. That these protests are by necessity, by nature, government sanctioned, or else they wouldn't be happening.
Yep.
They are allowed to happen by the government.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, even the million-strong protest and petition during the Iraq War that against Tony Blair's government, it did nothing. That said, the reason why it gives me joy is because it exposes something. It is, in that regard, apocalyptic, in that it is a revealing of something. It's a revealing of hidden preferences. And I know that this is a bit cliche to talk about the silent majority, and sometimes that can be weaponized in a kind of cringy way. But it really is true here. These are opinions that what these flags do represent, and this is where the left-leaning media do have a point. They do represent a more conservative, right-leaning politic. And what they are revealing are preferences and opinions that hitherto have not been allowed to be expressed, and they represent a pride in place. We've talked about this in a previous episode, several episodes. Pride in place, a pride in country, a love of country. And the challenge for us as a church is, what are we going to do with this? So, you mentioned already, Aaron, we're at Watch One Church, and we've had long gestating plans way before this summer, I should hasten to add, but long gestating plans to put up a St. George's flag on church property. We will be doing that shortly, coincidentally, at the same time as all this is going on. But the question is, not just for us as this local church, but in generally now, as a church, what do we, as Christians, what do we do with this? Are these people just hopelessly mistaken, hopelessly wrong? Or are they tapping into something that actually the church should have been articulating, witnessing to for a long time, but hasn't, for all the reasons
or actually has done historically, just as a complete standard? And it's only in recent time, modern times, that we've gone, oh no, that's a weird thing. No, actually, it's very much more weird what secular globalism has done to devaccinate people.
Yeah, absolutely right. There should be in the church a love of place. There should be in the church a sense, as we've discussed before, that as in the book of Revelation, that the nations bring their glory to the throne. That there should be a love of the country and all that it represents, and all the people of that nation, and that the church has got a particular witness and mission to that nation. So it is strange, once again, that it is popular culture that is having to come in and remind us of something that we should have been talking about for a long time.
Absolutely. And I must have made the point many times in recent months as I've been writing and thinking about this issue of making Britain Christian again. I did a kind of 3-part series on my Substack earlier this year, but also did a live podcast with Pod of the Gaps at a conference earlier this year about, can we make Britain Christian again? And it kind of goes back to what's the heart of that. For evangelicals, it's a strange question to ask, and lots of evangelicals don't like the idea because they don't like the idea of nationalism or national pride or national identity. There's constant fear about this. They're constantly worried that they'll turn into like kind of automatic Nazis or something, or there's just inherent dangers. It's like there's a worse kind of poison in national idolatry than anything else. And it's a really strange way of thinking. It's like, what do you mean? So you mean loving your country, it's like on the scale of kind of freighted propensity to sin, you are more likely to fall into a pit of national pride than you are globalist pride or borderless pride or some other kind of equivalent on the other side of this sort of political debate. It's a very strange a strange way of thinking, and especially the kind of culture that we find ourselves in, and historically the way that Christians have been able to look at this, including evangelicals in our own tradition, who just automatically assumed that that it was good to be patriotic and that Britain was a Christian nation. That was automatic for people like William Carey, and that's why he went to India to try to Christianize India and make India a Christian nation and do all sorts of good in India, and Indians today would testify to that. And as I found earlier this year when I was there speaking on these kind of issues and meeting many great Indians who respected Britain and the things Britain has done there, especially specifically through the Christian missionaries who had a socio-political outlook and things. It wasn't like an add-on. It was part of what mission meant. Part of what Christian mission meant was to bring change to the nation and to actually therefore cultivate a love of your nation, which is appropriate and ordered, of course, not superseding your love for God and his word, etc. But it's allowing God and his kingdom and his ways, his law to govern the way that you love your nation, so that your nation will not go astray, so that you can, see righteousness upholding a nation, as the Proverbs call us to. I was on that front. I was going to ask you, because you mentioned the difference between the Union Jack and the St. George flag. It is interesting, isn't it, historically, how that it's a safer bet for someone to go for the British flag. And it's a weird tension, isn't it? Because you don't want to be like, oh, I don't want to show solidarity with Welsh, Northern Irish or Scottish people. Of course we do. In ways, funnily, that some Scottish, Welsh, and Northern Irish don't want to show solidarity with England. But if I was asked this recently by a friend who's a pastor elsewhere, which flag should you fly? And I said, well, if you're in England, fly the St. George's flag. No one else is going to fly it for you. It's great to cheer on the Welsh as they fly the Welsh flag. Cheer on the Scots as they hoist the Scottish flag. And of course, we can all hoist our British flag. We are a weird, cocktail of a nation of nations. And there's something kind of glorious about that historically, about how, and that really arguably that's what King Alfred set out, really. And even that vision of the British Empire and then what became the Commonwealth, it is a weird thing. There's nothing quite like it in terms of the unity that can happen between nations, where people care about their own national solidarity, like Australians and Canadians. Let's say at a kind of, if there was an imperial height, there would still be a sense of, yes, Britain may be the controlling forces civilizationally because many of the peoples occupying those places came from there. But there was still a sense of national pride and culture that's distinct from England. And yet they're still connected to it. And I think we see that in the British Isles, in Great Britain, United Kingdom for sure. And I think that, but yet the St. George's flag is historically the one that people get in trouble for putting up. I remember there being a friend who lived close by to Cliff College when I worked there, and he had a St. George's flag that was there when he moved into his house, and he was always seen with suspicion. He was a Christian, just literally around the corner from the college, and the old principal who was there saw him with suspicion and had raised the fact that he had a St. George's flag in his garden. He said, well, it was just there when I arrived, but then I thought, I'm going to keep it up here rather than take it down. I quite like it.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, that's very dodgy. So everything else he did or said got seen through the views of, you might be racist because you have a flag of your nation in your own nation. It's just such a wild way of thinking, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Did it get resolved in the end then? Was he just allowed to keep flying it? And
yeah, well, I mean, obviously, the principal of Cliff College did not have jurisdiction over someone's house that was not on the college grounds, so I'm sure they'd like to. But yeah, so he did keep it flying. But he was always seen for his entire time that he lived there. He was kind of cut out.
Wow.
This was before my time, but he was still living there during my time. And by the time I came there, he was just this like kind of evangelical who used to be Methodist and was seen as just with suspicion because, again, literally because he was. I think they called him racist even though he had an adopted child who was Nigerian.
Well, of course, yeah.
I mean, they kind of like, well, even that's kind of racist because you're being paternalistic. So you can't win. Like literally, you cannot win.
You can't. It's the white savior complex. It's the game. It's the stupid game they play, and if you play it with them, you become stupid like them. And I mean, this has always been the way with England and with English flags, and I can understand it to some extent in that the English character, the English mind, is one that typically avoids extremes. It's typically one that avoids ostentatious displays of emotion. We are, at least historically, I wish we were still, at least historically known for our...
By the way, and would you say ostentatious displays of emotion, unlike... You want to give an example of another nation?
Well, shall we? Shall it just remain implicit?
Let's just say we have a lot of listeners there.
Let's just say one nation claps in cinemas and one does.
One nation under God.
Yeah. But we're generally not given to that, and we at least historically known for that stoicism, known for that stiff upper lip, and it isn't just a caricature. It isn't just a stereotype. It is actually true. At least it has been historically. I mean, I think Pete Hitchens makes this point that kind of that consensus began to break down in '97 with the death of Princess Diana and the sort of over-the-top irrational display, almost over-the-top excessive affection towards a relatively minor royal compared to the Queen, and yet she was pitched against the Queen. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. Point is, that is partly why historically the English have looked at the US displays of the flag and gone, oh, that's a bit much. And that's a bit much. We don't need to do that in order to be proud of a nation, apart from at the select times when we're allowed to, such as during sports events and such. So I can understand it on that level, and there has been, and that's partly why, as well, those who do display the flag are viewed with suspicion, such as this guy at Cliff, because there's an association, or at least suggested to be an association with the far right. Of course, everyone is far right now. Everyone is. You are. I am. Grandma is. Your pet is. Your rabbit is.
Grandma definitely is.
Definitely. Right, good point. Definitely. Yeah. So I'll just share this. Hang on. Let's see if I can share this here. This is fancy that we can actually do this. Let's see. Can I do this? Yes. There we are. Can you see that, Aaron?
Yeah. It's an image from Rochester.
Yeah, that's Emily Thornberry, who is a Labour MP. This is the classic example people give. That several years have passed. I can't remember which year it was now. She posted this in an obviously derogative fashion. I mean, it's outrageous because she's sharing an image of someone's house, proudly displaying the England flags. Obviously, a white van man, which has a sort of class stereotype in England, and is being, actively looking down upon this person. I still can't believe that she has any sort of responsibility in England in English politics at all. But that is
amazing. Just to say, literally, like the image, the tweet was literally just image from Rochester. Like this is the kind of stuff we're seeing on our streets. Houses with England flags on the windows themselves.
It's ridiculous, and they, as you're saying, it's a particularly English thing because you're allowed to display the saltire or the Welsh dragon or the Northern Ireland flag. You're allowed to display these things, but the English thing, again, perhaps for the national character previously mentioned, is just not allowed. It's the property of the far right. Except the problem is that's historically not been true. Actually, you can look back at Union Empire days, and this was actually a thing. An Empire Day. It was in May, and it was celebrated for many, many decades during the British Empire. And you would have England flags, St. George's flags being flown. So actually, we're getting our wires crossed here a little bit historically. And I think one of the reasons why the British flag, the Union flag, is more favoured is because the Union flag, first of all, it doesn't have the same sort of history. It's only about 300 years old. I say only, obviously in American context that's a lot, but it's only 300 years old, and it's a symbol of a political project rather than an actual place made up of a particular people. Namely the Anglo-Saxons and subsequently the Normans. There is a particular people, a particular ancestry, a particular ethnos, and that is what the English flag represents. Whereas the Union flag represents this political project begun in 1707, reinforced over subsequent centuries, that you can be British. Well, yes, you are British, but as per C.S. Lewis, it's the language of politicians. It's not the language of the soil. It's not the language of generations of history and tradition. It's not the language of a particular people in a particular place.
And just on that, do you think that there's an issue here? Because as soon as you say that, there'll be some, well, maybe not listeners to this podcast, but if we were in other settings, there'd be people who kind of like in the middle, those kind of middling evangelicals, who would immediately firstly worry about any notion of ethno. They hear ethnos, a people, which is the biblical word for nations, really. There's this phrase that comes up: we're worried about ethno-nationalism, and it's a really strange conception. I don't know what your thoughts are about it, but even quite sound people be like, well, I'm worried about ethno-nationalism because I guess they think it means we want a nation that doesn't have any foreigners in it. That might be what if that's what they mean by I get it. But ultimately, what is a nation, and how are you able to talk about are you allowed to talk about the ethnos? Or is there any time you mention the ethnos and saying it's a good thing to have a people, a particular people, is that ethno-nationalism? Is that one of those terms? Is that like Christian nationalism? I mean, which is easily misunderstood and therefore could have several understandings. And because we're so strongly against, let's say, the bad version of it, you can't even talk about a people at all.
Yeah, I think everyone thinks in ethno-nationalistic terms when they go to, say, Ethiopia or Japan, and you expect to see Ethiopian and Japanese people. You know, when you go to that nation, you expect to see the people of that nation. That's all we're saying. I think you've nailed it when you've said people are wary of it because they associate it with projects, you know, Austrian painters of the 20th century. You know, they associate it with vans going around and deporting people at gunpoint and all that sort of unpleasantness. And it doesn't have to, not necessarily. I mean, that maybe that problem is ours in that our side of politics, we need to, the political spectrum, I mean, our side of the spectrum, we need to sort of do some work to think through those things. But inherently, there's no reason necessarily why to speak of an ethnos, a people, particular people who've been there for, in the case of the English, for over 1,000 years, if not longer, for potentially up to 1,400 or 1,500 years, who have occupied that place successively, father and son, unbroken for up to 1,500 years. And that is, and they occupy that place, that specific place. It's not just anywhere, it's that place. We have to have a language for thinking in those terms. And therefore, English has to mean something. This is, you know, Fraser Nelson at The Spectator. He got into some hot water a few months back, didn't he? When he did that interview with Trigonometry, and he said that anyone can be English. That Rishi Sunak is English. Well, we have to. I think this is where the English and British thing are really helpful, because I'm very happy to speak about the political project that is Britain, and that some people are British, and that anyone can be British in the civic nationalistic sense. But in the particular sense that this nation especially has been shaped by that successive generation of a particular people inheriting a place and indwelling a place for a long time. But we can't say that Rishi Sunak is English. That doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any more sense than Cliff Richard is Indian because he spent some time in India. That's offensive.
And it would be seen as offensive, right? It would be seen as offensive for Cliff Richard to say, I'm now Indian.
Yeah.
But rather than just say, I identify or I care about the peoples of India, which is good. I think this is the irony. It's like the assumption of jingoism and xenophobia is just inherent in the critique of it. So you just go like, you're not allowed to say, because otherwise you will automatically do this. And as you say, rightly, what does that say about us and how we, as a national psyche, how we think about that, and how much we've been under a kind of oppressive ideology for such a long time of secularism, which has wanted to deracinate us as peoples anyway. And it's particularly not only anti-Christendom, we'll get onto Christendom stuff later on, but it's particularly anti-Western, which is therefore bound up with Christendom in some ways. So it just feels like there is a genuine sense of this is why you get a stirring on the right. You've always had loonies on the right, obviously, who are just going to be unpleasant people on the furthest. But whether people who are actually hateful of other people, that's a huge problem. But they haven't got the capacity, the magnanimity to be able to say, I like the fact that when I go to Japan, Japanese people are being Japanese, doing Japanese stuff. That's why we want to go on a holiday there, because there's a particularity to the culture. Similarly, there'll be people who come to England and expect there to be Englishness.
Yeah, well,
if you just multiculturalize everything, you're not going to have England anymore, are you?
This is the big debate, isn't it? Like you've got James Lindsay, who is at the Discourses. He was part of that classic academic satire, where he exposed postmodern by putting these ludicrous journal articles in, and they accept them, and like my dog was raped and stuff. It's some strange. Anyway, so James Lindsay, and he's the one now terming people woke right. He would term us. He would classify us as woke right.
Yeah, sadly, we didn't make the list. He did a. Oh no, was it Milo Yiannopoulos did a visual of all the people that James Lindsay has called woke right recently, and I think it had British woke right people or something. And we didn't make the list, sadly. So we're not doing enough. No, we're not doing enough.
I mean, this is the thing. He's defending a sort of liberal project, and by liberal, we don't just mean progressive. We mean liberal in that 18th century project sort of way. This liberal project, and the problem with it is that it dehumanizes people. As you said, deracinates it. It assumes that human beings are ultimately fungible, and that is to say, you can return anyone, and they're basically the same thing. Yes, one person might wear the ideas and the apparel of a Japanese person, but they're inherently just the same as any other person from any other place at any other time. And it kind of dehumanizes the extent to which human beings are are, as they are made in the image of God and placed at a particular point in time and made to be the inheritors of something that is bigger than themselves, and that they you know, like I am English, and so I assume some things. This is what George Orwell says, doesn't he, when he talks about going abroad? It's like only then do you realize just how English you really are, because the little things that you do and the little things that they do are so different at times. You realize
that the lion and the unicorn.
Exactly. Yeah, you breathed it in.
Yeah.
And actually, again, we're not just deracinated, atomized individuals. We're not just fungible human beings that can be replaced for any other and just wear different clothing. And if you just put the right liberal ideas into that person, they're just the same. I know we're shaped by the land. We're shaped by our forefathers. We're shaped by our upbringing. We're shaped by the geography. We're shaped by all sorts of things, and we're shaped.
Nathan, that sounds like blood and soil.
It does.
And we're not allowed to care about blood or soil, because that's a phrase. It's a catchphrase. And whenever you hear about someone who's gone bad, who's, let's say, a Christian who's gone bad and become a bit crazy, they've gone down that blood and soil route. And so it's like that dismissive way of how people can cut all the stuff you just said off and just go, well, yeah, that's just a romanticization, and it doesn't matter. So especially Christians, when they're talking about this, they're particularly wary about that, aren't they? They say, no, you shouldn't care about your forefathers. You shouldn't care about the land that you're in, because that's blood and soil. And we know who cared about blood and soil now, don't we, children?
The Austrian pain.
So therefore, the Austrian pain. So you can't go there. That's kind of the way they see it. But I kind of think that's a weird way of thinking. That way of thinking about caring about your place and your people existed before the 20th century, before that Austrian
I was about to say, it just assumes the 20th century. That's all it does. I mean, people have talked about blood and soil. People have talked about land. People have talked about particularity and place and nation. People have talked about that for hundreds, if not thousands of years before the Austrian painter arrived on the scene. Just because he represents a paradigm that assumed ABC doesn't mean that ABC is necessarily Austrian paintery. Doesn't necessarily mean that. We kind of have to be careful here and distinguish. So, like, look, the classic cliched thing is that the Austrian painter was also a vegetarian. Does that mean that all vegetarians are Austrian paintery? Well, no. That's I know that's cliched, but it's
CRP. We did a couple of episodes on this last year, didn't we? In terms of the whole post-war consensus, etc. Yeah,
exactly. As you say, Christians are very alert to it, and I think that there is reason to be alert to it, in that we do not want any politic to look. Christ is Lord, he is King, and he's Lord over all of our thinking and all of our assumptions. He's Lord over any political paradigm. He's Lord over any political program. He's Lord over all. And that means that we must subject and subordinate all of our thinking on this to him. And I see in what we're saying, what we're both saying, is that we see in Scripture the reasons to be proud of the place from which we're from. We're pleased, we're proud of that, and we see in Scripture that Scripture itself saying that the nations have a glory. Well, we have to do something with that fact. But we also see in Scripture that all human beings are made in the image of God. That we have a fundamental command to love our neighbors, that Christians ought not to be contentious, engaging in needless controversies, but rather to be tender-hearted and forgiving and not contentious, not gossiping, etc., but instead to be Christ-like in all our engagements. So what we're saying is the church ought to be, this is what the church ought to be doing. The church ought to be saying, isn't it glorious that you are English? Isn't it amazing that God has made you English? Come and let us show you what it means to be truly English. That is to say, an English person glorying God. That is what true Englishness means.
Absolutely. And of course,
worshipping is God.
Yeah, as you say, it's bound up. To be English it's not mere soil, because it's linked into culture as well, isn't it? So it's not only culture. So some people say it's only culture, only the things that humans have made and done in this particular land. But it's like that, to care about blood and soil in England is different to care about it in another nation. So if you're trying to extol the virtues of blood and soil in an Islamic country, for example, when firstly that's kind of complicated anyway, because a lot of Islamic countries historically weren't Islamic countries, but they were taken over by Islamic marauders in the early centuries of Islam. And so I think, and it was, Crusaders who then have fought back against that to some extent, and stopped coming to Europe, of course. But nonetheless, there's things that are bound up in a culture and a people which you don't really want to preserve. And so that's to think about Christianity and how that makes its way in into a culture is a complex thing. But nonetheless, in England, we should look to that heritage and say it's good.
You have already, in previous episodes, in a really memorable moment, described that train journey in which, classic English louts were doing X, Y, Z. That's you were deliberately bringing correction to that. We're not valorizing everything that English people do. That's the real problem.
Yeah,
that's when things have gone the wrong way around. Christ as Lord means that he brings that no to some things and yes to others, and we and the Christian is tested in his politic insofar as he allows that divine no to be given to something that he cherishes, something that he loves, which is his land and his culture. And sometimes Christ gives a no. So Christ would give a no to that English loutishness, just as he gives a no to the burning of the satis in India. However, valued that was. And I will say this on the blood and soil thing. Again, we have to give a yes and a no. Well, blood, okay. Well, Christ calls me to honor my father and mother. He calls me to value those who passed down the faith once we're all commended to the saints. Now, it matters then that I have generations behind me who I know for a fact, because I've looked at my ancestry, were faithful to the gospel. It matters then, as part of my fulfilling of the fifth commandment, that I honor the blood that I carry forward. That I am the beneficiary of. However, that's a yes, a divine yes to that. But the divine no to that would be when I start saying that my blood as an Englishman is better, or it makes me superior to an Ethiopian or Japanese. That's a no. All are made in the image of God. Likewise,
or indeed, if you had another English person, presumably, who didn't have the legacy, the ancestry that was faithful to the gospel, you wouldn't want them to feel like, oh, I'm a lesser Christian because I don't have 17 generations.
Because God renews and reforms households, and he makes all things good. Exactly. Likewise for the soil. Well, I'm going to say I believe that there's a divine yes to the fact that I love the beauty of England because it is divinely made and ordered. Likewise, it is a divine yes to the fact that I'm grateful that I live somewhere where there are no earthquakes, there are no venomous spiders, there are no, I'm grateful. I know it sounds silly, but that's exactly the sort of way in which Lewis talked or Chesterton talked about these ordinary things, the soil under our nails as we plow our gardens. That is good, and it's good that we're grateful for it. The divine no would come when that turns into an inhospitality towards those genuinely in need. And please don't hear that as me ordaining, boats coming across and illegal immigration. But there will be moments, won't there, in time in the past, let's say during the Second World War and other times, when England has had to open its doors to give rescue and refuge. Yeah. And that's all well and good. The divine no comes in when you say, no, only we are allowed in and we're just going to kick everyone else out. We don't need to be concerned. They are not our neighbor. And God would then come in and say, well, actually, let us think about who your neighbor really is. That's not the same thing as ordaining a ludicrous migration policy that says we should have several cities come in every single year in the form of illegal and legal immigration.
And like that discussion over ordered loves that's been going on for the last 6 months or so in relation to the US, it's okay to say, like, for now, because of the situation, because of the levels of immigration, because of the loss of national identity and various other issues, economic factors as well, we're going to have a harder stop. We're going to have a harder line. It doesn't mean that even doing that for a certain period, even for a decade, doesn't mean even that you're ceasing to love your neighbor. It's just saying you're ceasing to be a fully porous nation that doesn't care about its borders and doesn't care about its own people at all. It doesn't govern its people well. It doesn't even govern its own borders. That's just a fundamental. It's like, again, you're looking at the analogy of a household. We may have used this before, I forget. But because of that connection between the household and the nation and the family and the nation, that's why we care about our people per se. It's like you want to govern those borders. You don't want to say, hey, I want to be hospitable, so I'll have my front door open all the time. And it doesn't matter if people come in and whatever, my children are there. It doesn't matter. I don't even know who they are. They're just coming in and out. I'm not being a good father if I do that. I'm not governing the household if I just let anything happen to my children. Now, would it be a problem if you locked away your family in your house and never let them leave and never let anyone else see them? Yeah, that would be another kind of problem. That would just be speaking into a different kind of unvirtuous way that you ran your household. So goes the household, so goes the nation. I mean, of course, so goes the church as well. And another distinctly sort of divinely ordained sphere. And you see the effects of it. So it's okay to say, like you say, you want to love your neighbor, you want to be open-handed and open-hearted. But it's okay to therefore say, because of that, we need to protect our borders in order to be in a place of strength that we may be able to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's different to. I know that people will jump all over that and say, well, actually, you should give out of your weakness, etc. But part of this is just part of the political psyop that's being done on Westerners all the way through. All of those Western nations who are predominantly white historically are being called racist, so they can't kind of fight back. They're being called, ethno-nationalists, or whatever it is, for standing up for themselves. And so they are taught from a very young age to think you're not allowed to not open your borders in ways that other nations just don't. We're not trying to go to those nations and basically subtly colonize them in some way. That's not happening. We're not going to Uganda and trying to say, I want to become a Ugandan and I want to kind of create Little Britain in Uganda. That's not what we're trying to do, but we are seeing equivalents of that happening, not necessarily Ugandans, but we're seeing that happen in all sorts of ways here. And we're just being constantly told, no, you're not allowed to speak out, can't fight back in any way. I mean, politically speaking, you can't speak about that. And it goes part of that massive issue of just ongoingly. We're seeing it in other European nations. I think France has now started raising the flags recently as well in protest to some of the Islamic immigration issues they've been having. But it goes back to this sort of deplacing of people, which brings me to this quote I want to read out of an author we both discussed recently, Roger Scruton. And he wrote this book 25 years ago, and he was so ahead of the time. Philosopher, we were just saying the other day, weren't we? How he's intimidatingly brilliant.
Well, we were saying. I mean, I think it was even as recently as last night. I remember us having this conversation, and we should say about Roger Scruton, because there might well be several Christians who are not actually aware of him. We were discussing this exact fact. Now, I know that on Twitter and on some of the circles in which we run, that Roger Scruton will be very known and well known, but and yet his name, especially in church circles, isn't actually that well known. And he expressed sympathy towards Christianity, although I labored under the assumption for a long while that he was actually a Christian, so much was the case. And I think you had to disabuse me of that notion at one point when I was like, what, he's not a Christian? I can't believe it. But
I might have been, I'm not sure. I might have to, we may have to relook into that, because he's got a chapter in this book.
He was at the very least very sympathetic, and he famously wrote a book on the Church of England. But on his love for the Church of England, and that is to say the history of it, maybe not so much what it became. Anyway, my point, we should say just really quickly before you read the passage, that Roger Scruton is probably one of the most important philosophers that England has produced in easily the last 300 years.
Easy.
And he died relatively recently, and by that I mean only a few years ago as of speaking, but most of us let him pass us by. And yet I think more now that he's gone, we see that actually we were dealing with someone who was amongst us, someone who was of the caliber and substance and intelligence that you only really saw in previous centuries. When you look back very often when you read dead people and you go, wow, how was it that society was like this? They're so clever, so well read, they're polymaths, their interests are so varied. And that's exactly what Roger Scruton was. He could write as deftly on the Church of England as he could on wine, on vineyards, on horticulture, on agriculture, on fox hunting, and
it's intimidating.
It was ludicrous. So this man is, I think, someone as Christians, if you are interested in civic Christendomian things, to coin that phrase again. If you're interested in that and you're not already familiar with Roger Scruton, please do go and look up his books. He's written a great little short one, How to Be a Conservative, because he was also he was a conservative in that great Burkean Edmund Burke edition. Fantastic. Sorry, Aaron. I thought we should give it.
It's good. No, it's good. Very good. And I think, as I say, I've been reading this little book with my wife in the evenings. It doesn't sound like the most normal thing you'd read with your wife, but just almost with the kind of chaos of our house. Ordered chaos, I like to say, with 7 children running around, including 2 babies at the moment. it's nice to have a completely different thing to read in the evening. And so we were reading Roger Scruton's England, an Elegy. I mean, I lose this. Those of you who are listening to this won't see, but that's just a terrible 2000s style
Yeah, it is. He
cover.
would
Like it's
probably
just
not have liked that.
I can't imagine he approves a cover. I disavow this cover right now. Maybe I'll make a new cover or get a child to make one. But anyway, England, an Elegy, and he wrote it in the year 2000, I believe it came out. Yeah, 2000. And it is amazing how prescient it is. But even when we're reading this book in the evening, like this book, I have to look up various things. I have to have my phone next to me and kind of looking things up, including words. He had a use of words which wasn't used in the poncy academic way where people just throw in words that for the sake of it. I mean, it feels like that sometimes because he's using words you've just literally never heard of, which is kind of amazing. But it's also quite a down to earth style. So the actual the prose itself is quite readable. And again, that's something, the clarity of prose in our greatest thinkers is really important. You know, we've inherited this kind of, not to diss the Germans, but we should diss the Germans. They inherited that kind of Wissenschaftlich academic mode of speech, which is so verbose and so impenetrable in many ways. That's come from the continent, I would say, more than historically in England. But we've seen that in lots of the academia today. Where Roger Scruton, who was clearly academically minded, he was quite readable whilst being, again, intimidatingly and clever. But no, I don't think that he, on his face, is an interesting one. I'm quite unimpressed by the way he talks about Christianity in many ways. I know it's good that he does appreciate it, but I do think he appreciates the aesthetics of it. It seems like he tells a story of how he went to a Baptist church for a while. He was an Anglican church for a while, loves the liturgy, and he even appreciated elements of the Baptist church. But still, I feel like he's this objective observer. He's this brilliant critic of everything and brilliant analyst. But I would love to have seen him, speak with evangelical conviction. Of course, that might have been too much to hope for. We can just still appreciate him as you say, great man and a great Englishman. And he wrote this in this book towards in the epilogue. I'm going to read a long section of it and just let me know your thoughts. You can feel free to make notes in it, Nathan.
I will. I'll be typing away.
But in the epilogue of the book, it's called "The Forbidding of England." When he's talking about what we're talking about now, but he's talking about in the year 2000. What Christians were talking about this kind of thing in the year 2000? Did we have time to think about that? Maybe some Anglicans were. But certainly evangelicals didn't even have this on their radar, the kind of national conversation. It felt like it didn't exist. But here's Scruton talking about it. So, having been famous for their stoicism, as you mentioned earlier, Nathan, their decorum, their honesty, their gentleness, and their sexual puritanism, the English now subsist in a society in which those qualities are no longer honoured, a society of people who regard long-term loyalties with cynicism, and whose response to misfortune is to look round for someone to soothe. England is no longer a gentle country, and the old courtesies and decencies are disappearing. Sport, once a rehearsal for imperial virtues, has become a battleground for hooligans. Sex, freed from taboos, has become the ruling obsession. The English have the highest rate of divorce in Europe, regard marriage as a bore, are blatantly promiscuous, and litter the country with their illegitimate, uncared for, and state-subsidized offspring. Gone are the congregations and the little platoons. Gone are the peaceful folkways, the children's games, parlour songs, proverbs, and sayings that depended on a still-remembered religious community. Gone are the habits, the stiff upper lip, the aloof sense of duty, the instant assistance to the stranger in distress. That went with imperial pride. Gone are the institutions, the village shop, the market, the Saturday night dance, the bandstand in the park, through which local communities renewed themselves. None of that should surprise us. The loss of traditional virtue and local identity has occurred throughout Europe and its diaspora. England was part of Christendom, one branch of a spiritual tree which was struck by enlightenment and died. The global economy, the democratization of taste, the sexual revolution, pop culture and television have worked to erase the sense of spiritual identity in every place where piety shored up the old forms of knowledge and local custom fortified the moral sense. Nevertheless, the new media culture has been a particular misfortune for the English. When your fundamental loyalty is to a place and to its genius loci, globalization and the loss of sovereignty bring a crisis of identity. The land loses its history and its personal face. The institutions become administrative centers operated by anonymous bureaucrats who are not us, but them. The bureaucratic disenchantment of the earth has therefore been felt more keenly in England than elsewhere, for it has induced in the English the sense that they are really living nowhere.
Mm. As
Tremendous.
always, fantastic. You did a good job reading it. I could almost hear his voice.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that? I mean, it's amazing,
Yeah.
isn't it? How it kind of connects into some of the stuff we've been talking about. But then when you come across someone who's writing kind of about the same era, though he's writing it 25 years ago, you feel like, wow.
I was about to say the timing is very significant. 2000. So he is writing that, we should remember, before the impact of mass migration that has only accelerated the things he's describing. He's writing that 3 years into Tony Blair's first term. Things really hadn't taken,
Pre
9/11
as well.
But yeah, before 9/11, good point. Before the war on terror. He's writing it as well before equalities legislation. He's writing it before the clipping of the wings of the House of Lords, and I think by then Blair would have gotten rid of Lord Chancellor and robbed it of its constitutional role. But anyway, before a lot of this stuff happened, that at the litigious level. But I do wonder, in terms of what he was talking about. Several things struck me, and even the allusion there to the Saturday night dance. This is the sort of thing I think we've talked about before in previous episodes. That generation is going away that would understand what even was. I don't know if I've talked before on this podcast. I can't remember, but people might remember for me. People like my Auntie Rita and my Uncle John. These good English people who working class people who nevertheless sung Handel at Christmas time and. So wonderful English people who just represented an age that has long since been forgotten, who went to, who met at Boys Brigade and, did these things like the Saturday dance. The fact that pubs used to be segregated, that it was rare for a woman to be found in a pub, but increasingly so when they did.
Not racially segregated.
No, it's racially segregated, gender
It was
segregated.
great back then.
Yeah, very different, just different things. So it's interesting that he mentions these things, and also then that he mentions even things like the sexual puritanism. And I think here we start to see the extent of our indoctrination, because he's not saying that's a bad thing, and yet we would rush to caveat it with, but hang on, sex is a good thing. But he'd be like, yes, I know that, but there was a goodness in finding talk of that in public uncomfortable, except that where it was appropriate.
Vulgar.
Vulgar. Yeah, exactly. Vulgar. And that's some things you do not talk about, even with your friends. You keep that sanctified, and you keep that out of the bedroom, quite literally. That's really interesting, because I think lots of, I go into Tesco's now, the supermarkets, and there are, how to put it, perverse paraphernalia. Let's leave it at that. Littered, not hidden, not behind the shelf, not on the top shelf, not with a brown paper bag, but right there, public and publicized. And we have, I mean, that's just in the last 10 years, that's become more common. And it's disturbing, to be honest. It's disturbing because children are seeing it. It's weird that we're in a culture that thinks they need these things to begin with, but also that they would do this and have this and buy this in public. That's odd. That's strange. That's so un-English. You'd be historically that you would have to be some perverted old man in a brown trench coat, and you'd go to the specialist shops, and now you can get it whilst you get your lettuce and your bag of rocket. It's weird. It's so profoundly different, and it is. And it's interesting that he notes that. And that he mentions things like the Saturday dance, because both of those show the extent, in different ways, granted, very different, but they both show the extent to which we've changed. And of course, the connection is that the Saturday dance is often where people would meet, English people would meet one another, and but they'd be engaged in a sort of genteel etiquette, courtship. That when I said before that my Uncle John and my Auntie Rita, they met at Boys Brigade. That's so. What generation can understand that now? That there would be this
Okay.
ritualized. But and for a start, that there'd be a Christian group that was popular that would be martial, that would be imitating a
Yeah.
militaristic tone. That's
Yeah.
really interesting. So it
Yeah.
does still exist, the Boys Brigade, but it's nothing near what it
Oh,
used to.
by the way, when I worked at Cliff College, the Girls Brigade national headquarters was at the college. They rented some
Oh,
rooms off
right.
the college. So the Girls Brigade staff would sometimes join the morning coffee times and things. And I'd sometimes talk to some of them and go, so how are you doing in the kind of like protecting Girls Brigade from the trans type stuff coming in? Well, no, not necessarily, not just the trans stuff, just I guess why can't the boys join the Girls Brigade? And they were allowed to hold the line, which I found interesting. The Boys Brigade caved years and years
Yes, they
earlier.
did. Yes,
The girls were allowed to join the Boys Brigade. But even in recent years, I don't know if they were facing pressure to allow boys to join the Girls Brigade. And they were able to resist it. And that's just interesting anyway. People would more naturally at that time, even again, not even long ago, go, oh yeah, of course, yes, boys shouldn't join the Girls Brigade, but
Yeah.
of course, girls, why can't girls join the Boys Brigade? And it's just those little spaces that are protected areas. You see it in now. For me as a football fan, seeing now Match of the Day for the first time has now got female pundits, which is different to a female host. And it's just one of these little subtle areas that most people won't detect as a problem. But someone who's coming on and go, oh yeah, I've played football, I've played women's football. I'll come and give my opinion on a man's game. It's completely different. My expression of the game is completely different. My experience of it is just a different game, basically. But it has the same rules. So I'll just share what it was like for me in my changing room and this dressing room, what I would do in this situation. Well, no, sorry, you haven't played the same game. You don't get to come and speak about it as some expert. And people just think they have to accept that. They have to put up with this. But it's yet another incursion into traditionally male spaces, which again, back historically, when we had so many other things in order before the sort of Marxist bureaucratization of our culture, we were able to hold these things whilst show the benevolence of the structures and order as well. We weren't automatically going to subjugate all women and say that they're all inferior, terrible human beings. We were able to kind of hold these things in a kind of tension. And it probably also links to the Saturday night dance. That's probably a kind of downstream effect from the aristocracy as well, where they would, of course, have dances is where people would meet. That would be a chance for a couple to kind of begin courting and get to know each other in a chaperone kind of way in public. So they weren't kind of going off and watching Netflix, things in their college rooms, etc., for hours and hours together and having these deep emotional friendships before they drift into a relationship. As our generation, were more.
This is the world that he's describing. It's all these things, it's as you say with the women's football. That's obvious because it's on the surface. But what you and I probably have a memory of, and what younger generations will no longer have a memory of, is that England used to have a smell. Sorry, that sounds really strange, but
a scent.
England,
a scent.
Yeah, it really did. And by that I mean, I was talking about this with Ryan, the pastor at Watchon, but also I'll add to it some other thoughts of my own. He was saying that on Sundays you'd smell roast dinner, and it's true.
Oh yeah.
The English were known for their roast, by the way. The French in the Napoleonic era would comment on this, how English did roast so amazingly well. So it's not just a recent thing. It's not just a 20th century thing. It's common. Anyway, I could get into a whole conversation there about cooking implements and the effect on English.
By the way, in India, some of the Indians I got to know were shocked when they asked, what's the main national dish? And I think I said they were shocked to hear that there was some poll. I don't know if it's still the case, but there's some newspaper poll several years ago where the national dish was chicken tikka masala, or like it was the favorite dish or something like that. I remember hearing of in Britain, and they were like, "Oh, that's crazy! How is that possible?" Well, that's
there it is. And that's how it happened.
We don't uphold our own traditions.
But I know what I know what Pastor Ryan is saying there. You and I have no doubt would have experienced that. You'd go on first. All the shops would be closed. There you go, is a different England altogether. And you'd go out and you'd be out playing, and in every window there'd be the smell of gravy and roast dinner. And so we are talking about that. But I don't just mean that. I mean even more than that. Recently my wife and I befriended an older lady here in one of our little hamlets near Ashover village, and we went in and she'd lost her husband some years ago, and we went into her house. It's this old cottage, we're talking hundreds of years old, and this house hasn't been changed in about 70 years, and as soon as I walked in, I had the smell of something that I it's like it just came flooding back.
Mm.
It's a particular smell of a particular house. Older furniture, of course, older books, but not just that. A particular smell because of the way in which they live, because of the meals that they have, and the clothing that they wear. And it was like, woof! I was right back to being a kid, and the sorts of houses I used to go in, my aunties and uncles and friends of the family, and it was this. It's the smell of the silent generation, the smell of the 1940s and the 1950s, and it's gone. And the people who would go down on I remember in the 80s and 90s watching these older people who had been born, in some cases at the turn, just at the end of Victoria's reign, going to collect their pensions. Those people have gone. The Saturday dances have gone. The Puritanism that Scruton mentions has gone. The love of nation and the ability to understand that and not immediately jump moronically to the Austrian painter, reflexively to that lazy paradigm, that has gone, and this is
so quickly,
and has gone so quickly, and the character has gone, and when you can see. I challenge anyone to go and watch British films like the sort of Norman Wisdom films, yes, fine, but the Ealing Studios films of the 1940s and 50s, and watch those films and just go and look, not at the characters, look at the furniture, look at the housing, look at the buildings, look at the street scenes, go and look at the people who are just caught by accident on camera as those, just look at them. And I'm not just talking ethnically here, I'm talking how they hold themselves, how they dress.
But it would also, it would still be minority white people anyway, which is like, okay. It's in these depictions, isn't it? We're like, oh, let's just put a random black guy in the Anglo-Saxon England.
Of course.
Because we need to, like...
Yes, I saw that. Did you see that King and Conqueror, the BBC series, got a black person at the Battle of Hastings? And they also made Earl of Morcar, for some reason, mixed race. It's stupid. But
we were watching a documentary recently as a family of the history of London. It's fascinating. But I did say, I was trying to kind of, I do the dad thing of pausing stuff, teaching moment to be like, okay, here's just so you just aren't taken in by a clever looking archaeologist, right? So I think this when they were digging for the still incomplete train cross rail in London. So they're digging a new tunnel, and so because they were digging under the London, it allowed them to kind of look at archaeological stuff that they wouldn't normally have a chance to do. So they allowed archaeologists in to kind of excavate for a certain amount of time, before they shored up all of the foundations again. So it's a kind of fascinating concept that there's this window of time where you get to look at London's history. But you can just see how ready they are to read patterns in to tiny little fragments of history. And I know that maybe there are archaeologists listening to this. You can say, "Oh no, it's much more complicated than that." I'm not saying it's not. There isn't a logic to how you look at an object, an artifact of history, and see what story it tells. But I'm also just on a pure logical level extremely dubious about somebody in the 21st century who finds an object and tries to read into it. So literally, there's one guy on it who said, that there's this receipt written on a particular material. I think it's a hard material, so clearly it wasn't paper. And it was in the Roman occupation era. And saying, well, this could be a receipt for somebody who came from afar. We get this hint from like a tiny little detail of something that's said.
I know exactly what you mean. It's probably the Vindalanda tablets. I know exactly what you're talking about.
And then they're like, well, so really, London has always been this bustling, multicultural metropolis of all these different peoples coming together. Basically, they're trying to tell you, you have never had a people. You've never had an identity. There isn't one, and you shouldn't try to get one. And any idea that you could have one is a myth. Please reject it. And what we're telling you certainly isn't a myth. What we're telling you is the pure truth. That multiculturalism is what you are and was what you will be, because we saw this little tablet and we decided to read this massive story into it.
This is where it all kind of comes full circle for us, because if you remember, what was his name? The guy at Glastonbury who sang, "I heard you want your country back." I'm putting that in now. I heard you want your country back. What's his name? That stupid hit.
I forget the guy's name. Yeah,
Bob Villain.
Right. Yeah, that's it.
This, I heard you want your country.
The clue is in the name.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. I heard you want your country back, and then he swears you ain't getting that. It's stupid, and then he was deprived of another thing. But my point is that might have played for a Glastonbury audience because they're stupid enough to pay £500 for a ticket for a very underwhelming music.
Yeah.
But it doesn't play to the general populace, because I tell you what, I'm not the only one. If I was born in 1986, I tell you what, I'm not the only one, and neither are you, who remember what England smelled like and looked like.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
in that sort of comment is exactly the sort of comment that induces rage and frustration in the population, and that is why we're seeing the flags on byways and at junctions. That's why we're seeing this desire to reclaim something. All right, because the one thing you don't do with the English historically is back them into a corner. That's the one thing you don't do. It's very bad to do that. You know, Napoleon said we're just an island of shopkeepers, and look what happened to him. It's a terrible thing to do, and this is the great worry. This is the great concern, because once something is unleashed, it's very hard to put it back. And one thing England hasn't typically done is engage in revolutionary fervor. But if you don't allow that, if you don't allow a people to hold on to an identity, and if you tell them, as you said, if you deracinate them and you just say you're just like everyone else and you've never really had a place, you've never really had a people, you've never really had a heritage, well, it's going to produce a rage that has to be let out somewhere. And this is kind of where I'm connecting things. Again, when you watch those old films and you don't look at the main characters or listen to the script per se, you just look at the background, you look at the furniture, you look at where people are going, you look at how they used to dress, and you remember this is how things used to be. Well, what does the church do with all this? Taking it back round to the church's mission here. What does the church do with all this? Because the one thing that connects the old world and the new, the one strand, because that world is gone for the most part, but the one strand of connection between that which was and that which is Christianity. It's the one strand that connects the two. And it's almost like, the old telephone lines, the old, when you play as a kid, the bit of string that allows us to speak with the old world and engage with it and understand it. And if God willing, bring the goodness of it back, the only thing that will make that possible is Christianity. It is not protests and rallies and political fervor. The only thing that will bring it back is if the people putting up those flags turn to Jesus. That's the only thing, because it's the thing that built England to begin with.
Absolutely. And it's actually that I would say that the protests and rallies are necessary to still raise the alarm of the current establishment, I would say.
Yeah, I don't mean to say
how
bad to do.
So it's like, and it's actually
they're idle in their own time.
And we'll get onto an example of a rally in a moment, because that's a good segue. I just wanted to mention one thing quickly, because firstly, someone might be listening to this and going, okay, what on earth is roast dinner got to do with Christianity? That seems like that's just a little cultural pastime. Well, actually, no. It tells you a lot about family. It tells you something about Sabbath. It tells you a lot about some of the things that are actually Christian values and virtues, which are embedded in communities, and why they care for each other, why they look out for each other, and even why they care for their own nation. It doesn't, again, we've been saying, it doesn't automatically lead to xenophobia, jingoism, racism. Even if those things come in, they're not automatic. And when you start caring about these things and care about preserving those localized traditions, and as Scruton talked about, in many ways, that kind of little mini sermon from Scruton, when he's saying, gone is this, gone is that. He's talked about the moral degradation of the nation, isn't he? Seeing it happen before his own eyes, and we're seeing it even more so before our eyes. And I think it's interesting that when you look at things historically, I only came across this recently. You'll certainly know this, I'm sure, as a great history teacher. But I didn't realize how amazing, maybe we would talk about this, George III was so much better than we give him credit for.
Oh, absolutely.
So in terms of the instantiation of morals, bringing Christian morals into society. Of course, when people ask me where did the Christian values come from, I'll usually say, King Alfred, and maybe we'll talk about the Puritans. But actually, also so late 18th century, with George III's reforms are kind of amazing, and his proclamation. Think about a king releasing this proclamation in 1787, the proclamation for the encouragement of piety and virtue, and for the preventing and punishing of vice, profaneness, and immorality. Like the King of England.
Yes,
has released this proclamation encouraging piety and virtue, and he was in conversation with the likes of Wilberforce and things like that. That was part of how we saw the evangelical reforms in this nation. There was royalty, the monarch was on the side of this.
And by the way, it's very easy for critics at this point to say yes, but that was all just civic. It was just an impersonation of piety. It was just the aesthetics of piety, not the substance. We know that's not true. Because I think it was 2016 or 2018, around that time, Elizabeth II released George III's papers. This is the madness, of course, of the royal family, and it's the beauty of the royal family that George. This is Elizabeth II releasing her great granddad or whatever papers.
Yeah.
Likewise, Charles III is the 33rd great grandson of Alfred the Great. That's the madness of the royal family. Anyway, so she releases these papers of George III, and in them you find personal notes, commentaries on the Bible. He's studying the Bible and he's making copious notes, reflections. He's written like a list of some of the American founding fathers did this similar sort of thing, and Jonathan Edwards too. You know, he writes these personal aspirations, these personal convictions and personal goals for his life in line with biblical principles. He's doing all this. You can see it. We've got the evidence of it. This was a man who didn't just imitate Christianity. He was attempting to revive the substance of it as well.
Yeah, phenomenal. And he's actually even linking back to a previous proclamation, I think, from the William of Orange, 1690 something, I think it was 1692. And that's where the phrase "the Reformation of Manners" came from, which Wilberforce basically had as his life mantra. He read that and he's inspired by it, and he encouraged that kind of equivalent proclamation in his own time. And so, as you say, it's not a law legalizing, I guess, mandating piety, but it was a proclamation of the king does have a knock-on effect throughout the society, saying this is the standard that the monarch is raising for you to be held to.
Yeah, and people would have listened to it. People would have heard it and respected it. I mean, remember, this was a time when people would have pictures of the king in pubs and in their homes, even. Well, maybe not at that time. They wouldn't have had photographs, but you know what I'm saying. It was that sort of culture of respect and reverence, and it is interesting. I mean, I do find it. This is a subject for another time, but I think it is part of the problem when I'm seeing some conservative voices who would be quick to praise the putting up of England flags also speak so negatively about the monarchy and the royal family and other things. I think there is we were talking before recording about the problem with thinking in bits and pieces rather than in wholes.
Yes.
We start thinking in wholes. You can't imbibe the anti-hierarchy mindset of the French Revolution and then try and pretend like you're reviving something distinctly English, because those two things are categorically different.
Yes, the whole "not my king" thing. Even though, it's very lamentable.
There are big problems with Charles.
Absolutely. And he was in a mosque. Literally, the other day, he was in a mosque celebrating, wearing the full garb, celebrating. And you just when you think about George III, you're like, wow.
Yeah,
wow,
exactly. This is a subject for another episode, I think, probably. But we need to believe in monarchy even when our monarchs don't.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, amen. And of course, we the worshippers of the King of Kings. We and the King of Kings, meaning kings mattering. As the previous episode we talked about. Now, before I say we're tentatively heading towards a close, but I wanted us to play this little clip and read something in relation to it, because it links into this whole notion of the reformation of manners and piety in society. We talk about this regularly on this podcast, how evangelical distinctiveness. We have an episode right back from last year, early on. What is an evangelical? What does it mean to be evangelical? And heart religion mattering, conversion mattering, it really being a Christian mattering, confessing with your mouth, believing in your heart that Jesus is Lord and God raised him from the dead. And I think that there's a bit of a disconnect, which again Anglicans won't have a problem with, because they baptize their babies and kind of get on with it, and they care about the nation and see everyone in the parish is connected somehow in the parish, even if they don't want to be. And I think that there's something that evangelicals miss when we sort of think, well, therefore you can't bring religion into the public square, you can't bring Christian virtue and value. So I presume many evangelicals would be against maybe George III's proclamation, because it assumes that Christian piety is possible and virtue does anything aside from heart conversion. Now, there's an interesting thing that Nick Tanconi did the other day. Nick Tanconi is he's a Christian, and he's an explicitly Christian political leader. He leads UKIP. This isn't going to be a UKIP party political broadcast or anything, but I'm sure there'll be loads of things I disagree with him on. But from what I've heard, he's one of the only politicians who's explicitly saying we need to make a Christian nation. And so he was having people at one of these rallies, which was, I believe, outside an asylum hotel, one of these lovely places that we decided to put up. And so there's obviously all these right-wing protesters with English flags there. And here's what he says.
You guys are amazing. By way of law, how Christian are we here? All right then. It's time for the Our Father. If you would take your hats off, gentlemen, and if you would bow your heads, please. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, one true God, one true faith. Christ is King! 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 Christ is King!
So I don't know what you thought about that. Obviously, you could see in the clip there, it's. Well, I mean, what I quite liked about it first was the fact that he asked the gentlemen to take their
I thought
their caps off.
Nice.
And of course, there were people that were near him. Clearly, he weren't praying the Lord's Prayer. They're opting out of it. But he was calling first, wasn't he? For are there Christians here? He wasn't assuming that everyone's a Christian, but he was saying, "Have we got any Christians here?" And people are shouting and cheering. And then the people who are shouting, "Christ is King," you're presuming they know what they're saying. Even if they might not know everything about what they're saying. And they're praying the Lord's Prayer because they're praying for God's kingdom to come, His will to be done, which is in relation to everything else that's happening as well. So I guess, and this is the thing that Krish Kandiah, the evangelical former principal of London School of Theology back in the day for a very short time, and various other things, sets up various charities, things like that. But often outspoken on the what he probably think is just the centre, but it's clearly just the left. On this kind of thing. He said, "I'm deeply uncomfortable with the way the Christian faith, and specifically the prayer that Jesus taught his followers, is being used to support an anti-immigrant protest." He said in a quote tweet, "The Lord's Prayer was given to us by Jesus himself. It's not a political slogan, nor a cultural weapon. It's a sacred call to reorient our hearts, our lives, and our communities around the love, justice, and mercy of God. Jesus, the author of this prayer, spoke with absolute clarity about the centrality of love. He told us to love our neighbours. He even told us to love our enemies. That kind of love is active, costly, and compassionate. It never looks like intimidation or hatred. It is not loving to gather a crowd, wave flags, and shout outside someone's home, however temporary that home may be, i.e. the asylum hotel, especially with the goal of making them feel unwelcome, unsafe, or unwanted. Imagine what that would feel like. Imagine being told you don't belong in a place where you've come seeking safety or stability. That is not Christian hospitality. That is fear dressed up as faith. The Lord's Prayer is not a dog whistle. It is not a slogan for exclusion. It is a radical invitation to submit our lives to the rule and reign of a God whose kingdom comes through peace, whose will is done through love, and whose name is hallowed, and we show compassion to the stranger, the vulnerable, and the outsider." Any thoughts on Krish Kandiah, OBE, by the way? He has, he has imperial connections.
Look, we've talked about Krish Kandiah before. I'm trying to be polite. In this. Look, has he said some things there that are true, in that the prayer is sacred? It is. Mm-hmm. It cannot, insofar as it is obviously spoken by the Lord Jesus, it cannot and should not be, and will not. It will not be subject to any worldview or program other than Christ. So, okay, so some of that I can understand what he's saying, but the problem is, as we've said many times before, in fact, the last time we talked about Krish Kandiah, this notion of love that he has is just a very strange one, in that it happens to marry quite closely with what the world expects love to look like. This, that it perfectly matches a pro-immigration political platform and policy.
Everything the secular globalists wrong. They just magically already were Christian. They didn't realize it.
Exactly, and this idea that, that it should not be, I couldn't quite catch the exact terminology, but something like it shouldn't be done. This prayer of love, does not look like raising flags or something. Doesn't look like
or a dog whistle is the phrase he used.
Oh yes,
quite interesting.
Which is of course,
dogs.
Yeah, it's just a stupid term that is used these days. But that notwithstanding, I mean, the reality is that, as you've said, I think you've said it already this episode, that the Lord's Prayer has historically been used by leaders of this country to gather the people of this country together under Christ. And this man, I don't know the motivations of his heart, obviously. I don't really even know much of what else he stands for. So this isn't to be taken as some sort of ordination or ordaining of all that he stands for. But from what I've just seen, my impression of it was he was trying to say, look, this is futile if it isn't Christian, that this protest that we are trying, this country we're trying to fight for is a Christian one. And so he leads them in prayer. I don't see it as hostile. I don't see it as violent. I see it as it seems to be fitting. Where else are these people meant to? How else are these people meant to express their discontent with the current state of things? Where else are they meant to do this? How else are they meant to do this? That it doesn't meet Christian Dyer's, narrow sense or narrow criteria for a proper, decent protest. He would probably have them never do it if he's totally honest. He would probably have them never speak up. And if they were to, where's the appropriate place? Where else are they meant to do it? Anyway, forgive me. Thoughts, but still.
No, but the assumption, of course, in his sort of kind of critique is also all of those people who are in those asylum hotels are genuine asylum seekers.
Yes, that too.
So that's like an extremely that is not at all the case. They don't know, and often it isn't the case. It's okay to say often that isn't the case, because there's also, even those who are legitimate asylum seekers, we've said many times, they've had to come through many countries to get to Britain. They're choosing to come to Britain specifically, of course, because the benefits are better, or maybe they have other reasons because they might have family connections here already. I don't know, but often it's not as straightforward as someone fleeing over one border, like you see in some countries on the continent.
It would be really
there's nowhere else for them to go. There are other places to go. Coming and being put up in a nice hotel in England, it's not for him to go, this is their home. What would you like it if someone came outside your home and started making you feel unwelcome? Well, Chris, that's literally what lots of British people now, English people now feel like. Funny that you should mention that. That's literally what people feel like.
If he complains, that's how the leader of the Prime Minister, the leader of the Labour Party, described it, as a nation of strangers. So the thing is, I'd be very interested to know, let's imagine a hypothetical situation, right? Let's imagine that there is a cathedral service, or let's not make it too easy for him. Let's imagine that there is a gathering in public of people who are protesting, or at least rallying for a kinder Britain, a Britain that is more open to immigrants, asylum seekers, etc. And let's say a religious leader steps up and he leads the crowd in the Lord's Prayer. I wonder if Christian Dyer would take exception to that. And yet that is just as political and is just as partisan as what we've just watched. Both of the, both would be advocating for, in the one that we just watched and the hypothetical one I just mentioned, both would be advocating for a particular political outcome. Both would be assuming certain political things. Both would be expressly political in their nature, and yet one is acceptable and the other one is unacceptable. And the only reason I can imagine Christian Dyer would find one, if indeed I'm correct, and I think I am, that one would find one acceptable and not the other, is that one expresses his political opinions and the other one doesn't. And that's the reality. Yeah. It's the prevailing assumption now that right-leaning politics is like a disease. It's like an infection. It's not a legitimate political opinion all of its own. It is more like an infection that dirties and diseases that which it touches, be it the Lord's Prayer or something else. Whereas they don't assume that about liberal politics. No. They wouldn't assume the same thing about that hypothetical liberal rally I just mentioned, that it would infect the Lord's Prayer. They wouldn't assume that. And that is another assumption that would need to be examined. And unfortunately, it's far too prevalent. That liberal, progressive opinions are seen as the norm, and conservative politics are seen as the aberration.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to what we were saying earlier, but this is one more example, one further example of how so many Christians today have cut themselves off from their forebears, spiritually speaking, as well as, of course, those of their own land and their own people, they're cut off even from their own people in terms of God's wider kingdom, God's kingdom of nations that are to be discipled by Christ around the world. Because so many Christians before that just wouldn't think like this. So many of those things that people like Christian Diane and many others like him would sort of sneak in. And it sounds very pious. And as you say, there's things that you do need to be wary of. Of course, you don't want people assuming, desacralizing the Lord's Prayer or things like that. But the assumptions that are in that are just embedded. To assume that they're doing something bad, that they must be on the wrong side here. A total unwillingness to examine his own ideological presuppositions, just assuming that the secular global order, basically, which tells you how to think and how to act and how to think about these issues, is kind of magically almost Christian anyway.
Well, again, I'm sorry, I know we're kind of shadow boxing a little bit, but you can also imagine a hypothetical situation in which, let's say, this was captured at a non-conservative rally, and that you can hear what would be said. Isn't it good that even if it's imperfect, at least Christ is being preached. Even though it's imperfect, at least the Lord's Prayer is being heard.
Yeah.
And this goes back to something you have raised again in previous episodes, which is how else are we meant to reach these people if they're not even allowed to utter the words of the Lord's Prayer? They're not even worthy to utter these words. How are we meant to reach right-leaning people in this country, which apparently seems to be far larger than Christian Diane might like or enjoy to think?
And should we have taken the Lord's Prayer out of schools? Would Christian Diane et al. Like us never to have said the Lord's Prayer in any schools across the nation? Should all the CV schools that still say the Lord's Prayer automatically take it up because not everyone is automatically a Christian at any given moment? It's just one of these further, ludicrous things which will cut away the heart of any public confidence in Christianity. And I mean, but that by which I don't mean confidence of the public in Christianity. I mean that Christians being confident in public, which means more than just saying, "Can I invite you to invite Jesus into your heart at some point?" And then we'll talk about all these other things like the Lord's Prayer and etc. But we won't talk to you about those in advance. No, you can actually assert that Christ is King. Christ is Lord. There's a meme on Twitter, isn't there, often going around, of Aragon. I forget the exact scene, but it's with him and Theoden, King of Rohan, where it's like, I think it's like war is upon us whether you like it or not. It's like Theoden going, "Okay, Christ is Lord," and then Aragon, "Christ is Lord, whether you say it or not, whether you know it or not." Just with that kind of stoic face, very English stoic face he has, even though he's not English. We go, but so like there's that sense that we do need to proclaim that confidently and say, and really that can be genuinely winsome as well. You can do that without being a complete jerk to people, but we do need to proclaim Christ's kingship and lordship. So I know that many evangelicals won't like a crowd standing outside the asylum seeking hotel chanting Christ is King, because it makes it look like you're saying Christ is King, therefore we hate you, get out. That isn't what those people are saying, and it will be seen as that. That isn't what they're trying to say, but they are saying Christ is King. This is a Christian country. We are going to proclaim it so. We believe this is what the foundations were. We're going to live it and make that happen. I think churches would actually do quite well to lean into this as well. Even those who like to be winsome, sort of not quite seeker sensitive. I wouldn't advocate seeker sensitivity per se, but just that general sense of what is good of that concept in 1 Corinthians 9 of being a Greek to a Greek, a Jew to a Jew. If you are British, you should be a Brit to a Brit, an Englishman to an Englishman, Englishwoman to an Englishwoman. You should lean into that and say, actually, put a flag outside your church, and let the liberals or let the kind of midwits come and tell you off and say, "Oh, you're being idolatrous of your nation," and you just go, "Okay, how? Can you prove to me how am I doing that? Am I doing that? If I am doing that, please, I'm more than open to correction. Come to me with the word of God and say you are idolizing your nation. You're worshipping it above the Lord your God. If you are doing that, then yes, repent. Why not stop worrying about what all of the kind of people who already seem to loathe so much that is good and beautiful and true about what happened in this land and other lands like it, and just actually do what you actually feel is right, genuinely right, not just you personally feeling it, but what has been called right for many more centuries than you've been alive, and that is actually governed by the word of God. So it is okay to put your flag up and go, yes, I'm proud of where I am, where I'm come from. And then because of that, because there's a cross on this flag, it actually means that we are cross-shaped in the way that we hold our national identity, so that we don't just go, we're going to therefore cut everyone else out and be unloving and unkind. Even as Scruton mentioned in that earlier kind of sermonette that I read out, that there is a sense of caring for those who are genuinely in need, and that will absolutely extend to asylum seekers. That will extend to people who are in genuine need. But we don't need to allow bandits to come in and just to go take over and go, well, therefore we must welcome anyone at any time, welcome anyone, any villainy, any complete cultural sort of deracination of our people as a result. And so I think that's the thing that we need to recover. Christians need to think more about this. Of course, we've had many times we've said, listen to previous episodes and hear more about this. Nathan, any kind of final thoughts from you before we close out?
No, other than what we have said, which is that the church has to make sense of this somehow. The church has to make sense. There has to be an answer, some answer to the flags being put up on motorway junctions. There has to be something. And the prevailing assumption of so many of our evangelical kindred would be either no answer at all or suspicion. And I just don't think that's good enough. Something is happening here. I don't think it's civil war. I don't think it's going to change everything overnight. I'm not suggesting some sort of great changes, category sea change is about to happen necessarily, but something is happening. Something is, if we are to be like the tribes of Issachar and know the times and seasons, well, what do we know? What does the church know? What is its witness? What can it, and what should it say? Or does it have absolutely nothing to say? Because some churches have actively avoided, in fact, at some points shunned the sort of grammar and the kind of ideas that would allow them in this moment to be able to speak. What can the Church of England say at this present time? What can those, Krish Kandai's sort of milquetoast evangelicalism say right now? It has nothing to say but animosity. Those of us who are interested in Christendomian things, we have something to say. If you're part of a church that in any way sympathizes with these ideas, you have something to say, and therefore be encouraged and say it. Do something, as Aaron has said, put a flagpole. Let the midwits come and say you're just idolizing this and that. Let the stupid Facebook groups, the spotted groups, Facebook spotted groups, say something. It doesn't matter. The people will see. The people who will see it and take note. Do not be surprised then if you get people in your congregation you never thought would have come normally, but come to hear what you've got to say because at last you're speaking to something real.
Amen, but well, as you were saying, let the midwits come. I imagine King Theoden again at Helm's Deep. Let them come.
Let them come.
Like water. So yes, well, we hope, listeners, if you found this helpful and encouraging and inspiring in some way. If you are enjoying this, please go and listen to previous episodes. If you're new to the podcast, we're getting a lot of new listeners recently. Please go and listen to previous episodes and hear some more of what we've been getting into. And we do now have a Patreon page. So please do go and look at that.
Is that good?
Yes, we do.
All right.
So it would be great to have some subscribers to that, and we'll hopefully try and work on some additional content for those who are Patreon subscribers going forward, which would be really exciting to do. And so please go and check that out on Patreon in the usual way. There will be links to that in the show notes, etc. And we'll be back soon again with another episode with some more content along these kind of lines. And we hope and pray that you will continue to be challenged and inspired by it. So we leave you then again, listeners. Be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Defy the devil and act like men. Love the brotherhood. Fear God. Christ is Lord. God save the King. This has been That Good Fight. We'll see you next time.